I don't think Joan was feeling any too happy. I know I wasn't. We were both wondering if we'd done the wrong thing. But now there was nothing for it but to wait. And while the Queen Elizabeth was coming into berth at Southampton, I was trying to finish the narration of our last assignment. We'd been in Britain for some time making a series of TV reports, and we felt we'd earned a good vacation before we went home. I'd had it all planned out, and then in a rash moment, we'd invited our stage-struck niece Susan over to join us on what we had intended to be our own private holiday. What would we think of her now? And what would she think of us?
Passengers from the Queen Elizabeth are about to disembark. To comply with customary.
I guess we were all a bit shy and anxious to like each other. I remember trying to imagine the host of impressions that must have been sweeping over her all at once. Overseas for the first time, and finding her land legs after 5 days on the ocean. Meeting us again after 3 whole years. Funny how kids think of everyone over the age of 30 as old fogies. Still, I guess that's a part of growing up. The strangeness of everything. The trains. They must have looked a good deal smaller and more compact than the trains back home. And a foreign country where they speak the same language, more or less.
Will all passengers traveling to London please take their seats in the train, which is about to depart?
And then, almost at once, the English ritual, afternoon tea. I remember Joan and I had a little disagreement about what Susan would like to do first. I'm sure Susan was thinking, why don't you both relax? Give me time. Let me enjoy things in my own way. In London, with all its famous historic buildings, I felt it even more. What could it mean to Susan? It looked, some of it, old and maybe even at first a bit drab. And there was Susan looking at it with eyes fresh from our country, where the emphasis is all on the shiny and new. When we saw the Tower of London, and the Beadle guarding all that money at the Bank of England, Joan and I wanted so much for Susan not to think it was all just a dramatic survival from the past. I couldn't resist the temptation to point out that a quarter of the world's commerce is handled around here. That evening in Piccadilly, that's the Times Square and Broadway section of London, we got a real surprise. Susan told us she had already taken the opportunity of this vacation to apply for an audition at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art to study for the stage. Well, I suppose there's nothing like killing 2 birds with 1 boat ticket. We had planned a tour of Britain, but quite naturally, Susan wanted to do a few shows in London first. We figured a few day trips would be a good idea so that she could be back each evening. At the railway's travel centre, right in London's West End, we got details of the best way to go sightseeing. We'd be going to the Shakespeare country later. But first, there were places only 1 or 2 hours train ride from London. Chaucer's Canterbury Tales had always seemed far away to me, but somehow, being there made it different. Maybe it was finding the cathedral right in the center of the life of the town. Anyway, as Joan said, it seemed as though we were rubbing shoulders with the pilgrims through the ages. The boys in the white robes, it looked like part of the cathedral choir. But they turned out to be scholars of King's School, a boys' school which has been in the precincts of the cathedral for 700 years. We wondered how many of these boys would go on to receive a university education at the place we visited next, Cambridge. We wanted Susan to see something of the university life and its buildings. King's College Chapel, for example. What finally happened, I'm afraid, was that Joan set a cultural pace we couldn't match. Susan and I found we preferred to do the backs of the Cambridge colleges, the easy way. Easy for Susan, that is. In Britain, you know, you never seem to be far from water. And it was from Waterloo Station in London that we took off for the southwest coast of England, to Devon, Cornwall. I'm quite sure Joan and I no longer regretted the loss of our own private holiday, but we were still a bit self-conscious about being a teenager's guide to old England. One thing delighted us. That crisp, youthful charm of Susan's quickly broke down the traditional reserve of the English boy at our luncheon table, and he became the first in a series of conquests that she seemed to make, from one end of Britain to the other. England's West Country is a wonderful place for doing absolutely nothing. Just letting the peace and quiet of the place lap over you. Makes you feel young again. I think it was in the West Country, at that Manor House Hotel, that Susan really began to understand the importance of tea in the British way of life. With Susan's interest in the theater, we felt it was just as well she realized why it was that so many of the wittiest lines in the comedies of Oscar Wilde and Noel Coward are played against a background of cucumber sandwiches and the tinkle of teacups. But it's a bit hard to be quite as elegant with Devonshire cream and strawberry jam. We were staying just on the edge of wild Dartmoor, famous for its prison, which we didn't need to visit, and for its wild ponies, which we did. Down by the coast, we found the old cobbled streets of Clovelly with its lure of tourist shops and smugglers' hideaways. But even when scenery is beautiful and different, we can only take just so much of it. In Britain, the place to meet people is the pub. The pub, like tea, is one of the great British institutions. Pub, short for public house, is a kind of cross between a hotel, an inn, and a bar to us Americans. But what a bar! a traditional meeting place, a clearinghouse for national news, neighborhood gossip, swapping a good story. And you can even get a drink there, too.
2 pints of beer, please.
Part of the pub tradition are the games. One's called Shove Halfpenny. I wasn't very good, but I guess encouraging a tourist is part of the pub tradition, too. Particularly as the loser buys a pint all round. I think Susan must have been rather puzzled by all this tradition. Down at Plymouth, near the old Barbican Harbor, I was able to get some good shots. But it was Joan who got the most out of it. After being kindly entertained and courteously used by divers friends there dwelling, the Pilgrim Fathers sailed from Plymouth in the Mayflower, in the providence of God. We had always thought of Plymouth as an historic city, so the new Plymouth took us by surprise. Although the center has been rebuilt in the modern manner, many of the old houses down by the harbor have managed to survive. We found the house where some of the pilgrims spent the night before they set sail for the New World. I tried to imagine Captain Miles Standish and his shipmates in these rooms, sleepless, on the brink of their new life. But it was Susan who remembered Longfellow's poem, The Courtship of Miles Standish, with Priscilla's line, "Speak for yourself, John Alden." At Plymouth, we'd felt very close to the heart of America, but now turning inland, we were going close to the heart of England. And we saw something that's very close to an Englishman's heart. The white-clad figures on the village green, the gentle movement of the wind in the trees, the click of bat on ball. It's cricket. Close by, we found something very familiar. Sulgrave Manor, with its English garden, was the home of the Washington family. The Washington son, George, by the way, is known in England, too, as the little boy who wouldn't tell a lie. But seriously, the ancestral home of our first president is now a museum. A most unusual museum. Joan thought it was more like a real lived-in home, as if the family had just gone out visiting while we took a look around. What got me was the ingenious 300-year-old meat roaster with its self-timing device. In perfect working order, too. Somehow, I believe it was on Susan that Sulgrave made its biggest impression. And we felt it was important for her to use her imagination if she really wanted to make a success of her audition at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art. If she really wanted to understand Shakespeare's lines, as well as speak them. In the Shakespeare country, in the villages and fields of the Cotswolds, the past began to come alive for the girl, as if it were here, now, tangible. Hath not old custom made this life more sweet than that of painted pomp? And this our life, exempt from public haunt, finds tongues in trees, books in the running brooks, sermons in stones, and good in everything. It might have been on battlements like this that Hamlet saw his father's ghost that faded on the crowing of the cock. Carnarvon Castle is not too far away from Stratford for Shakespeare to have seen it. We know he never went to Denmark, but he may have come to Wales. It was in the Welsh village of Llangollen that we caught up with an Eisteddfod, which turned out to be an annual festival of folk singers and dancers gathered from all over the world. 25 nations there were. And what do you know? The Smith College Choir. On our way back to London, our minds full of the traditional past, I was brought back to earth, or was it the opposite, by Britain's Jodrell Bank. There they have the big, in fact the world's biggest radio telescope, with its giant reflector set to catch the echoes from outer space, bringing information from 2,000 million light years away. Or some fantastic thing like that. We had broken our tour of Britain to go back to London with Susan for her great moment, for her audition. There are some things you have to do alone. Auditions are like visits to the dentist. They seem like such a good idea until you get there. Joan and I went shopping. Of course, London has some wonderful regular shops and the temptations are terrific. But the street markets are just the place for bargain hunting. Like all good tourists, we were out to find a bargain. Though it's almost as good if you only think you found one. Susan went out and spent some anxiety money on a present for herself. She didn't know the result of her audition yet and just had to possess her soul in patience. With her newfound independence, she decided to go ahead of us to Scotland to take in the Edinburgh Festival.
Scotsman sleeping car train for Edinburgh will depart from platform 6 at 11:35.
An audition in the morning, a shopping expedition in the afternoon, and now, after a theater, an all-night journey over the border to Scotland. She must have been feeling very grown up. Susan's new boyfriend delighted her by wearing the kilt. With him, she went to the festival's plays and concerts. But despite all that international culture, the thing she enjoyed most was the tattoo held at night within the battlements of Edinburgh Castle. Before it was time for us to go home, we met Sue at a famous hotel right on the edge of the Scottish Highland country. At Glen Eagles, of course, the great thing is golf. The resident professional, Jack McLean, made a whale of a shot. I had too, right into a sand trap. While we were in Scotland, Sue got her wonderful news from the Royal Academy. She'd won a place for a 2-year course in acting. Joan helped her to compose a tactful letter to her parents so that she seemed to be asking, but was really insisting on permission to stay. Near Glen Eagles, there were places we wanted to see. Places like Llangollen Castle, where the Scots gave Dwight Eisenhower an apartment for his lifetime. And just across the water is a new atomic power station. Because of the reporting job I'd been doing, I got special permission to go over it. This is one of several in Britain which will put nuclear energy to peaceful use. The construction seemed pretty intricate, but then the British have always enjoyed a challenge. When tossing the caber, a sawn-off tree trunk is lifted and tossed end over end. Well, that's the idea anyway. Tossing the cable was only one of the Highland sports we found at the Braemar gathering.
Last lap.
We soon discovered why the Braemar gathering has been called the Royal Highland Games. By tradition, a very informal occasion. I remember back at the hotel, I was almost sad that night. Joan and I were leaving Sue next day. We were going home to California. Sue was living in the present, as usual, but before her lay drama school and the promise of an exciting career that was only a vague dream when our vacation began. A vacation that had turned out to be rather more fruitful for her, and certainly more varied for us, than we'd expected that first day in Southampton. Like the tides, people come and go. We wondered, would Sue be lonely? But then how could she be? When you begin to understand a country, you're never really alone.